When my 8-year-old grandson called me that Tuesday afternoon, whispering that my own children, his parents, were planning something against me, I felt the ground collapse beneath my feet. 72 years of life, and I never imagined I'd one day suspect the two people I loved most in this world. The phone rang at exactly 3:47 on a Tuesday afternoon, and somehow I knew my life was about to change forever. "Grandma Rose, they're talking about you again." The voice was small, careful, like he was whispering secrets through the walls. 8-year-old Tommy, my youngest grandson, the one with those knowing eyes that seemed to see straight through people's lies. My hands were covered in flour from the apple pie I'd been making for Sunday dinner. The same recipe my mother taught. Me 60 years ago, back when families still gathered around tables and meant what they said to each other. I wiped my palms on the kitchen towel, the one with tiny roses that matched my name, and pressed the phone closer to my ear. "What are they saying, sweetheart?" A pause. I could hear cartoons playing in the background, something loud and colorful that kids watch these days. But Tommy wasn't watching. He was listening, always listening. Daddy and Uncle Mike were in the basement. They didn't know I was upstairs, but I could hear them through the heating vent. They said you're getting old and forgetting things. They said, maybe you shouldn't live alone anymore. The kitchen suddenly felt colder. I looked around at my domain, this house where I'd raised 2 boys, buried a husband, celebrated 43 Christmases, and countless birthdays. The walls held 52 years of memories, photographs of graduations and weddings, report cards. Stuck to the refrigerator with magnets shaped like vegetables, this wasn't just where I lived. This was who I was. "Did they say anything else, honey?" Another pause. Longer this time. When you've lived as long as I have, you learn that the things people don't say are often more important than what they do. They talked about your house, about how much money it's worth. Uncle Mike said something about papers you signed, but Daddy told him to be quiet because Mom was coming downstairs. His voice got even smaller. "Grandma, are you really forgetting things?" I stared at the half-finished pie on my counter. Every measurement perfect, every step deliberate. My mind was as sharp as the day I graduated valedictorian from high school in 1968. I could recite every birth date, every anniversary, every important moment in my family's history. I knew exactly how much money sat in each of my 7 bank accounts, could tell you the square footage of this house down to the inch, and remembered every conversation I'd had with my sons in the past 5 years. "No, sweetheart. Grandma's memory is just fine." I didn't think so. "You always remember everything, even my friends' names, and Mom can't even remember that." A rustling sound like he was changing positions, hiding deeper in whatever corner he'd claimed for. This secret phone call. "Grandma, I think they want your house." Those 6 words hit me like ice water. Not because they were surprising, but because deep down, in that place where mothers keep their most painful truths, I'd been feeling it for months. The way my oldest son, David, suddenly started asking about my investments. How my youngest, Mike, began showing up with flowers and offers to fix things that weren't broken. The way their wives smiled too brightly when they complimented my cooking, their eyes already measuring my china cabinet and antique furniture. "Thank you for calling. Me, Tommy. This stays between us, okay?" "Okay, Grandma. I love you." "I love you too, baby." The line went dead, but I kept holding the phone, staring out my kitchen window at the garden I'd tended for decades. The roses were blooming late this year, deep red petals that reminded me of the lipstick I wore on my wedding day. Everything was exactly where it belonged, exactly as I'd planned it, except for the feeling growing in my chest like a storm cloud, dark and heavy with the weight of betrayal. I set the phone down carefully, the way you handle something precious that might shatter. Then I did what I always did when the world shifted. Beneath my feet, I finished the pie. But while my hands worked the familiar motions, rolling and crimping and brushing egg wash over golden crust, my mind was racing. Every conversation from the past 6 months suddenly took on new meaning. Every concerned question about my health, every suggestion that I might want to consider my options for the future, every time one of them showed up unexpectedly and seemed surprised to find me perfectly capable of managing my own life. The pie went into the oven, and I sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold while I was thinking. This table had hosted 10,000 conversations, first words, last words, fights and reconciliations, dreams shared and hearts broken. Now it was going to host something else entirely. Planning. I pulled out the leather notebook I'd been keeping for 40 years, the one where I recorded everything important, not just appointments and grocery lists, but observations. The way people moved when they lied, the things they said when they thought no one was paying attention, the habits that revealed their true character when they thought no one would notice. For the first time in my life, I was going to use those observations against my own children. The next morning, I called my bank. "Hello, Margaret. It's Rose. Peterson, I need to schedule an appointment with someone about organizing my financial records. For estate planning purposes." My voice was steady, grandmother sweet, exactly what everyone expected from a 72-year-old woman who supposedly needed help managing her affairs. "Of course, Mrs. Peterson. How about Thursday at 2? "Perfect. And Margaret, I'd like to do this discreetly. I want to surprise my family with how organized everything is." She laughed. "What a wonderful gift that will be for them." If she only knew. That afternoon, David showed up with grocery bags I hadn't asked him to bring. He bustled around my kitchen, putting away items I already had, making noise about how I shouldn't be going to the store alone anymore. "Mom, I worry about you driving in traffic. What if something happened?" He was using that voice, the one that sounded concerned but felt controlling. The same tone he'd used when he was 16 and wanted to borrow the car for reasons he wouldn't explain. "I've been driving for 54 years without incident, David. I think I can manage a trip to the grocery store." I know, but you're not getting any younger and things happen so fast these days." He paused by my kitchen counter, his eyes lingering on the mail I'd left there. Bills, mostly, and a letter from my investment advisor. "Maybe it would be easier if you gave me a list, and I could pick things up for you, save you the trouble." Trouble. As if living my own life had become an inconvenience. That's very thoughtful, but I enjoy getting out. It keeps me sharp. Of course it does. But his smile was the kind you give to children when you're humoring them. "Just promise me you'll think about it, okay? Mike and we just want what's best for you." After he left, I stood in my kitchen and felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. The same feeling I'd had when I was 12 years old and caught my best friend reading my diary. That sick, hollow sensation of discovering that someone you trusted had been looking through your private life, measuring it, judging it, making plans you weren't part of. The difference was, this time I wasn't going to cry about it. Friday morning brought Mike, my younger son, with coffee and pastries from that expensive bakery downtown. He'd never brought me bakery goods before in his life. I made better cookies than anyone in the state, and he knew it. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, settling into the chair his father had occupied for 28 years of marriage. "Thought we could catch up." Catch up. We talked every Sunday, at family dinner. We had nothing to catch up on except the conversation he'd had with his brother in David's basement, while my grandson listened through the heating vent. "How's Sarah?" I asked about his wife, watching his face. "Oh, she's fine. Busy with her book club. She mentioned that you seemed a little tired last Sunday. Said maybe you should consider slowing down." There it was again, the concern that felt like a noose. "I feel wonderful, actually. Sharp as a tack. In fact, I've been thinking about taking that cruise to Alaska I always wanted to try. Maybe this fall. His face changed so quickly, I almost missed it. A flash of panic, quickly covered by a smile that didn't reach his eyes. That's great, Mom. Really great. But maybe you should talk to someone about it first. Make sure it's the right choice financially. Financially. My younger son, who had never asked about my money in his entire life, was suddenly concerned about my finances. I can afford it, Michael. I've been planning for retirement longer than you've been alive. I know. It's just that managing money gets complicated as we get older. Scammers target seniors, you know. Maybe David and I could help you organize things, make sure everything's in order. I sipped my coffee and tasted betrayal. It had a bitter aftertaste that no amount of sugar could cover. I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs. Of course you are. The same humoring tone his brother had used. We're just worried about you being all alone in this big house. What if you fell? What if something happened and no one knew? I had lived alone for 7 years, since their father died. In all that time, neither of them had expressed concern about my safety. But now, suddenly, they were both deeply worried about my well-being. After Mike left, I did something I'd never done before. I went to my bedroom, opened the safe hidden behind the painting of lilacs, and took out my will. The document I'd signed 5 years ago, leaving everything divided equally between my 2 sons, with trust funds for the grandchildren and generous donations to my favorite, charities. I stared at those pages for a long time, thinking about the children I'd raised. Boys who had scraped knees kissed better, nightmares chased away, school projects helped with at kitchen tables. I'd taught them to ride bicycles and drive cars and treat people with respect. I'd shown them how to work hard and tell the truth, and love their family above everything else. Somewhere along the way, I'd failed them, or maybe they'd simply decided that money mattered more than the woman who had given them life. I put the will back in the safe, but I didn't lock it yet. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed and made a decision that would change everything. If my sons wanted to treat me like an incompetent old woman who couldn't manage her own life, then I would give them exactly what they expected. But I would be in control of every single moment of it. The game was about to begin, and they had no idea that their supposedly forgetful mother had just become their most dangerous opponent. Because there's one thing nobody teaches you about getting older. You don't just accumulate years. You accumulate knowledge, patience, and the kind of strategic thinking that comes from decades of managing a household, raising children, and surviving everything life throws at you. My boys were about to discover what their mother was really capable of when she stopped pretending to be helpless and started fighting back. Monday morning, I called the one person in this town who knew everyone's business better than the pastor and the mailman combined. Eleanor Hartwell, private investigator, former police detective, and the woman who'd helped me find my stolen jewelry 3 years ago when the insurance company said it was probably just misplaced. Eleanor, it's Rose Peterson. I need your help. With something delicate. What kind of delicate, Rose? Her voice was all business, which I appreciated. Some people treat older women like we're made of porcelain and good intentions. The kind where I need to know what my family is doing when they think I'm not watching. A pause. Then, family surveillance is always complicated. Are you sure you want to open that door? The door's already open, Eleanor. I just need to see what's on the other side. We met that afternoon at the coffee shop downtown, the one with mismatched chairs and students typing on laptops. I dressed carefully, choosing my most grandmotherly cardigan and the pearls Harold had given me for our 20th anniversary. Let people see exactly what they expected to see. Eleanor slid into the booth across from me, her gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She looked like someone's favorite aunt, which was exactly why she was so good at her job. "Tell me what's happening," she said, pulling out a small notebook. I told her about Tommy's phone call, about the sudden interest in my health and finances, about the way my son's behavior had shifted. Over the past few months, she listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in handwriting that looked like tiny scratches. "How long has this been building?" she asked when I finished. "I think it started after Harold's funeral. Maybe before that, but I was too grief-stricken to notice." David asked me about the will at the reception, said he was worried about me being alone, wanted to make sure I had everything organized. I stirred sugar into coffee I didn't want. At the time, I thought he was being thoughtful. And now? Now, I think he was taking inventory. Eleanor nodded. Family money brings out the worst in people. I've seen it destroy relationships that survived everything else. She closed her notebook. "What exactly do you want me to find out?" "Everything. Where they go, who they talk to, what they're planning. I need to know how deep this goes and who else might be involved." "Their wives?" The question hit a nerve I didn't know was exposed. Sarah, Mike's wife, had been distant lately, always friendly on the surface, but something cold underneath. And David's wife, Jennifer, had started asking odd questions about family heirlooms, wondering about the stories behind certain pieces, whether I'd ever had them appraised. Probably. Maybe. I don't know anymore who I can trust. What about the grandchildren? Tommy's the one who warned me. He's the youngest, but he sees things. The others. I thought about my other grandchildren, ranging in age from 10 to 17. They love me, but they're kids. If their parents told them I was sick or confused, they'd believe it. Eleanor leaned forward. "Rose, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Is there any chance they're right? Any chance you have been forgetting things or showing signs of confusion?" I met her eyes directly. 3 weeks ago, I balanced 7 different investment portfolios to the penny. 2 weeks ago, I rewired the electrical outlet in my bathroom because the contractor was going to charge me $400 for a 20-minute job. Last week, I beat David's 17-year-old son at chess 3 games in a row. If that's dementia, then half the population should be so lucky. She smiled. I had to ask. "I know. And Eleanor? I want you to start with Sarah, Mike's wife. There's something about the way she looks at me lately, like she's seeing dollar signs instead of her mother-in-law. I'll have preliminary information by the end of the week." Walking home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the thrill of taking action instead of just reacting. For too long, I'd been content to let life happen around me, to play the role everyone expected. The grieving widow, the aging mother, the sweet grandmother who baked cookies and asked no difficult questions. But I wasn't just those things. I was also the woman who had put herself through college while raising 2 children, who had built a successful catering business from nothing and sold it for enough money to secure my future, who had managed our household finances so well that Harold could focus on his carpentry without worrying about bills. I was Rose Peterson, and I was done being underestimated. That evening, David called to invite me to dinner at his house on Friday. "Jennifer's making that roast you love," he said. "The kids want to see you." "That sounds wonderful. Should I bring dessert?" No, don't worry about it. Just bring yourself." Don't worry about it. In 52 years of family dinners, I had never showed up empty-handed, not once. But now suddenly, they didn't want me to contribute anything except my presence. Friday came with unseasonable rain, the kind that makes everything look gray and melancholy. I dressed carefully again, choosing clothes that made me look slightly more fragile than usual. If they wanted to see an aging woman who needed their help, I'd give them exactly what they expected. David's house was warm and bright, filled with the smell of pot roast and something else I couldn't identify. Something artificial, like the scented candles Jennifer bought in bulk from that multi-level marketing company she'd joined last year. "Mom, you look tired," Jennifer said, kissing my cheek. "Are you sleeping okay?" Some nights are better than others. True enough, though not for the reasons she was implying. Dinner conversation flowed around me like water around a rock. The kids chattered about school and friends, normal family noise that should have made me happy. But underneath it all, I could feel the current of adult conversation, the meaningful looks between David and Jennifer, the way they steered talk, away from certain subjects. After dessert, while the kids disappeared to their rooms, David poured wine for the adults. I accepted a glass I had no intention of drinking. "Mom, Jennifer and I have been talking," David began, settling into his chair with the careful posture of someone about to deliver rehearsed lines. "We're worried about you rattling around in that big house all alone." "I'm not rattling, David. I'm living." Jennifer leaned forward with that bright smile she'd been perfecting lately. "Of course you are, Rose. You're incredibly independent. But don't you think it might be nice to have less responsibility? Fewer rooms to clean, no yard work, no maintenance issues?" "I hire people for the heavy work. The house is manageable." "But what if something happened?" David's voice carried that familiar tone of manufactured concern. "What if you fell and no one found you for hours? What if you forgot to turn off the stove?" I've never forgotten to turn off a stove in my entire life, but I let that slide. I have a medical alert system and neighbors who check on me. "That's not the same as having professional care available 24 hours a day," Jennifer said. "There are some really lovely communities now, designed specifically for active seniors, places where you could make new friends, participate in activities, not worry about the day-to-day maintenance of a household. Active seniors, the phrase hung in the air like smoke from a fire you can't locate." "You've been looking at places?" I asked. A quick glance between them. "Just preliminary research," David said. "We want to know what options are available, what might be a good fit for you down the road." Down the road. As if my current life was a temporary situation that needed to be managed rather than a permanent state that deserved respect. "I'm not ready to move anywhere," I said quietly. "Of course not," Jennifer said quickly. "No one's saying you have to do anything right away, but it might. Be smart to get on waiting lists now while you still have choices. Some of the better places have 2-year waiting periods." 2 years. They were planning 2 years ahead for the day they could ship me off to some sterile facility where I'd play bingo and pretend to enjoy arts and crafts with other women whose families had decided they were no longer capable of independent living. "Have you talked to Mike about this?" Another glance. "We've discussed it," David admitted. "He agrees that we should start exploring options." Of course he did. They'd probably had multiple conversations about my future, mapping out my decline like military strategists planning a campaign. Except I wasn't declining, and this wasn't their war to fight. "I appreciate your concern," I said, standing up with deliberate care, making sure I looked slightly unsteady. "But I'm not ready to make any decisions about my living situation." "Mom, no one's asking you to make decisions tonight," David said, rising to help me with my coat in a way that felt more controlling than courteous. "We just want you to think about it, okay? For our peace of mind." Their peace of mind, not mine, theirs. The drive home through the rain gave me time to process what had just happened. They'd presented their arguments like a coordinated attack, each point carefully planned and delivered. This wasn't a spontaneous conversation born from sudden worry. This was a strategy session that had been building for weeks, maybe months. At home, I poured myself a real glass of wine and sat at my kitchen table with the notebook where I recorded my observations. Under today's date, I wrote, "Formal presentation of nursing home option, coordinated approach between David and Jennifer, mentioned discussions with Mike, timeline, 2 years, implication, not negotiable, just delayed. Then I added, they see me as a problem to be solved, not a person to be respected. The phone rang at 9:30. Mike's number appeared on the caller ID. Hey Mom, David said you had dinner with them tonight. How was the roast? Small talk. First, feeling out the territory. It was delicious. Jennifer's getting better at seasoning. That's great. Listen, Sarah mentioned that you seemed a little overwhelmed last Sunday when we were all there. She wondered if maybe the big family gatherings are getting to be too much for you. Sarah, who had barely spoken to me last Sunday except to comment on how quiet I seemed. Now, apparently, my quietness had been reinterpreted as being overwhelmed. I felt fine on Sunday, Michael. Maybe a little tired, but nothing unusual. I know, but Sarah thinks maybe we should consider smaller gatherings for a while. Give you a chance to rest between visits instead of having everyone over at once. Smaller gatherings, which meant they could control the narrative more easily, present their concerns without witnesses who might disagree, work on me individually instead of dealing with the chaos of multiple perspectives. I enjoy having everyone together, I said. It's what your father would have wanted. A pause. When people invoke the dead, it usually means they're losing the argument. Dad would have wanted what's best for you, Mom, and if that means adjusting our traditions a little bit to accommodate your changing needs. My changing needs. Another phrase that sounded reasonable on the surface, but carried implications I was supposed to accept without question. My needs haven't changed, Michael. I still enjoy cooking for my family and having everyone in my home. But it's so much work for you. Maybe we could start having dinners at our houses sometimes. Let you be the guest instead of the hostess. Let me be the guest in what had always been my domain. Let me sit politely while someone else made the decisions, planned the menu, controlled the environment. Let me become a visitor in my own family. I'll think about it, I said, because sometimes the only way to end a conversation is to give people the illusion that they've been heard. That's all we ask, Mom. Just think about what might be easier for you. After he hung up, I sat in my dark kitchen and felt the weight of their coordinated campaign settling around me like fog. They weren't just concerned about my living situation. They were systematically dismantling my role in the family, reducing my independence piece by piece until I had no choice but to accept their solutions to problems I didn't actually have. But what they didn't understand was that I had spent decades watching people, reading between the lines, understanding the subtext of family dynamics. I knew exactly what they were doing, and I was going to be ready for whatever came next. Because the difference between a victim and a survivor isn't intelligence or strength or even luck. It's the willingness to fight back when fighting back seems impossible. And I was just getting started. Eleanor called me Tuesday morning with news that made my coffee taste like ashes in my mouth. We need to meet, she said without preamble. Not at the coffee shop this time. Somewhere private. She came to my house that afternoon, carrying a manila folder thick with photographs and documents. Her face was grim in a way that made my stomach clench with anticipation. Rose, you're not going to like what I found, she said, settling into Harold's chair. Your instincts were right, but it's worse than you thought. She opened the folder and spread photographs across my coffee table like tarot cards predicting disaster. Pictures of David meeting with a man in an expensive suit outside a law office. Mike and Sarah having intense conversations in restaurant booths, their heads bent together over documents. Jennifer shopping for real estate brochures, visiting facilities I'd never heard of. They've been planning this for 8 months, Eleanor said. Since January, right after your birthday party when you mentioned wanting to travel more. 8 months. While I'd been living my normal life, cooking Sunday dinners and tending my garden, my own children had been systematically plotting to take control of everything I'd built. The man David's meeting with is Richard Steinberg, an attorney who specializes in elder law and guardianship cases. I managed to get close enough to overhear parts of their conversation. She pulled out a small recording device. "You might want to sit down for this." I was already sitting, but I gripped the arms of my chair anyway. David's voice came through, the tiny speaker, tinny but clear. "The key is documenting incidents of confusion or poor judgment. Small things at first, then building a pattern that shows she's no longer competent to manage her affairs." The lawyer's voice was smoother, professional. "Has she shown any signs of memory loss, difficulty with financial decisions, changes in personality?" "Not yet, but she's 72. These things develop gradually. We're being proactive, making sure we have legal options when the time comes." "And your brother is in agreement?" "Completely. We're both concerned about her safety and her assets. She's been making comments about wanting to travel, maybe even moving to a warmer climate. We can't let her make impulsive decisions that might jeopardize her financial security." My financial security. As if I hadn't been managing money successfully since before they were born. Eleanor stopped the recording. "There's more. But you get the picture. They're building a case for incompetency, even though you show no signs of it." "What about the facilities Jennifer was looking at?" 3 different assisted living communities, all expensive, all with excellent reputations. But here's the interesting part. She pulled out more photographs. She wasn't just touring them as potential options. She put deposits down on 2 of them, waiting list deposits, but still, she's committed money to securing your placement. The room felt like it was spinning. Without asking me, without even telling you these places existed. Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm. "Rose, they're not planning for your eventual decline. They're planning to manufacture reasons for your immediate removal from this house." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Harold and I had planted together 30 years ago. The roses were in full bloom now, deep red and cream and pink, exactly the way I'd trained them to grow. This wasn't just my house, it was my life's work, my identity, my connection to everything that mattered. "What else did you find?" "Sarah's been researching your financial situation. She's got connections at the bank through her sister, who works in customer service there. Small town networks, everyone knows everyone. She's been asking questions about your accounts, your investments, the approximate value of your assets." The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. Sarah, who had married my youngest son 12 years ago, who I'd welcomed into the family like the daughter I'd never had, who had asked me to teach her my cookie recipes and listen to stories about Mike's childhood with apparent fascination. How detailed is their information? Detailed enough, they know about the investment accounts, the rental properties, the life insurance policies. They don't have exact figures, but they have a rough idea of your net worth. I sat back down, feeling older than I had in years. What they don't know is that I've been moving money around for the past month since Tommy's phone call. Opening new accounts, transferring assets, making everything more complicated than it appears on the surface. Eleanor raised an ABC eyebrow. How much more complicated? Let's just say that if they think they know what they're dealing with, they're going to be very surprised. Good. But Rose, there's something else. Something that's going to hurt. I braced myself. Tommy isn't your biological grandson. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Mike and Sarah adopted him when he was 3. His birth mother was Sarah's teenage niece, a girl who got pregnant and couldn't keep the baby. The adoption was private, handled within the family, but it was never officially disclosed to you or Harold. My mind reeled. Tommy, my youngest grandchild, the one with the knowing eyes and the protective instincts. The child who had warned me about his parents' plans because he somehow understood that family loyalty should flow both ways. Why didn't they tell us? I don't know. Maybe they were planning to. Maybe they thought it didn't matter. Maybe they were protecting the birth mother's privacy. But Tommy found out about 6 months ago when he overheard Sarah talking to her sister about it. He knows? He knows he's adopted, and he knows his parents never told the rest of the family. He also knows that he's not their biological child, which might explain why he feels more loyalty to you than to them. Eleanor leaned forward. Rose, this child called to warn you because he sees you as his real family, not them. I thought about Tommy's small voice on the phone, careful and worried. A little boy who had discovered that his parents were capable of deception on multiple levels and had chosen to protect the grandmother who had always treated him like he belonged. No questions asked. There's more, Eleanor continued. I followed Mike and Sarah to a meeting yesterday with a financial planner. They're already making arrangements for what they plan to do with your assets once they gain control. She handed me another photograph. My son and his wife sitting across from a man in a suit, documents spread between them, calculators and legal pads covered with figures. They're planning to sell this house immediately and put the money into investments they control. The idea is to keep you comfortable but dependent, with them managing every aspect of your finances for your own good. I stared at the photograph until the faces blurred. These were people I had loved, sacrificed for, worried about, celebrated with. I had attended their wedding, helped with the down payment on their first house, babysat their children, cooked thousands of meals, offered comfort during every crisis. And they were sitting in an office, planning how to carve up my life like it was already over. What about David? What's his role in all this? David's handling the legal aspects, Mike's handling the financial planning, and their wives are managing the practical details like housing options and medical evaluations. It's a coordinated effort, Rose. They've thought of everything. Except the possibility that I might fight back. Eleanor smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. Exactly. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in 7 years. I called Harold's lawyer, the man who had handled our wills and estate planning, who had been present at our most important financial decisions. Robert, it's Rose Peterson. I need to schedule an appointment to revise my will, completely. Of course, Rose. Is everything all right? Everything is about to be very different. We met the next morning in his downtown office, a space that smelled like leather and old books, and the kind of authority that comes from decades of handling people's most important decisions. Robert Morrison had been our family lawyer for 30 years, a man whose discretion was absolute and whose loyalty was unshakable. I want to disinherit my sons, I said without preamble. He didn't even blink. May I ask why? I told him everything. Tommy's phone call, Eleanor's investigation, the coordinated campaign to have me declared incompetent so they could control my assets. He listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes, his face revealing nothing. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me with eyes that had seen every kind of family drama imaginable. Rose, this is a significant decision. Once we put these changes in writing, there's no going back without considerable legal complications. I understand. And you're certain about their motivations? Sometimes family concern can look like manipulation from the inside. I pulled out copies of Eleanor's photographs and played him the recording she'd made. He examined everything with the careful attention of someone who had spent decades distinguishing between genuine concern and calculated greed. All right, he said finally. What did you have in mind? I want to create a trust that they can't touch. Something complex, enough that even if they somehow get legal guardianship over me, they can't access the money without meeting very specific conditions. What kind of conditions? I smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it felt genuine. The kind that will teach them what family actually means. We spent 3 hours designing what Robert called the most creative trust structure he'd ever written. The bulk of my estate would go into an irrevocable trust that could only be accessed if my sons met a series of requirements over a 5-year period. They would have to volunteer at least 20 hours per month at organizations that served elderly people. They would have to attend monthly family counseling sessions with a therapist of my choosing. They would have to write detailed letters of apology, not just to me, but to their own children, explaining their behavior and the lessons they'd learned from it. Most importantly, they would have to demonstrate, through actions rather than words, that they understood the difference between caring for someone and controlling them. And if they refuse? Robert asked. Then the money goes to charities that protect elderly people from financial abuse, with smaller amounts set aside for the grandchildren when they turn 25. Including Tommy? Especially Tommy. He gets the same amount as the biological grandchildren, plus a separate fund for college that can't be touched by Mike and Sarah. As Robert's secretary typed up the documents, I felt something shifting inside me. Not just anger or disappointment, but a kind of clarity I hadn't experienced since Harold's death. For months, I'd been drifting, letting life happen around me instead of actively participating in it. Now I was taking control again, not just of my money, but of my story. The new will was signed and witnessed that afternoon, with copies secured in Robert's safe and another copy hidden in my own house, where my sons would never think to look. As I drove home, I realized that the hardest part wasn't behind me. It was just beginning, because now I had to decide when and how to reveal what I knew, whether to confront them directly or let them continue their charade until they showed their true colors completely. Whether to give them a chance to change course or let them discover the consequences of their choices the hard way. That evening, Tommy called again. Grandma Rose, they're having another meeting tonight. All of them, at Uncle David's house. They told me to stay upstairs and play video games, but I can hear them talking. What are they saying, sweetheart? Something about papers you need to sign, and a doctor who's going to visit you soon. They keep using words I don't understand, but they sound important. A doctor. The next phase of their plan, probably a psychiatric evaluation to establish my supposed incompetence. They were moving faster than I'd expected, which meant I was running out of time to prepare my counterattack. Tommy, I need you to be very brave for me, okay? Can you listen to what they're saying and remember the important parts? I'm already listening, Grandma. And I'm writing it down like you taught me when we play detective games. My 8-year-old grandson taking notes on his parents' conspiracy against me. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so heartbreaking. Good boy. And Tommy, no matter what happens in the next few weeks, no matter what anyone tells you about me, I want you to remember that I love you and I'm not sick or confused or any of the things they might say. I know, Grandma, you're the smartest person I know. After he hung up, I sat in my kitchen and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to wait for them to make their move. I wasn't going to play defense while they systematically dismantled my life. I was going to strike first, and I was going to make sure they never forgot the lesson I was about to teach them about underestimating the woman who had given them everything they had. The war for my life was about to begin, and they had no idea that their supposedly helpless mother had just become their most formidable enemy.